I played chess like a python. In this game, I was playing a 1900 from Spain who was in his 60s, and I had the white pieces. I go e4, my opponent goes for c5, and played something that I really rarely see in the Sicilian defense. I go knight f3, d6, d4, c takes, knight f6. So far, this is very typical. It can even go into a Sveshnikov, it can even go into a Najdorf. All the options are open. I go with knight c3, and now my opponent surprises me with knight c6. And this is the rouser variation of the Sicilian defense, something that I don't often see. I have played it once before in a tournament, I think in England, and I go with bishop g5 in this line. The idea is that we're pressing on this knight and putting a little bit of turbo in this center. So that on g6 we can take here and then takes, and this pawn would be isolated and weak, etc., etc. So e6 is played, which is a variation that's very much possible in the rouser, queen d2, and basically I go for an early castles long. The idea is to put pressure on this d6 pawn in case the bishop, wanders a bit too far. Let's say goes to f6, well then this will be a hanging pawn. For example, if you go with h6 now, here I can take on c6, attack the queen, b takes, and now go bishop f4. And already the black pieces are suffering from this d6 pawn, which is a bit weak and needs to go d5 now. And now I can go e5, kick the knight, and have a pretty nice position. Oh, it's not e5? Okay, well, it's e5 in my opening book. My opponent goes with bishop d7 and intends to take back the knight with the bishop and then just like harm the center. So I go with king b1, which is like a patient move and just like a waiting move. This has been played by multiple super grandmasters like Levin Aronian and I think Lenny Dominguez. So bishop e7 is played now. My opponent is preparing to castle. But on castles is never really obvious. I go h4. Let's say you castle now. I can trade here, and then I can trade here. And this becomes annoying for black. Let's say you take with the bishop, I can just take a pawn here, and if you take back with the pawn, well, the king is extremely weak. I can even go with rook h3 things with rook g3 and it becomes checkmate pretty quick. So after h4, my opponent doesn't want to castle short and goes with queen c7, telling me that there are possibilities my opponent castles long. The problem with castling long in this rouser Sicilian is that I have also castled long. So where is the play? The play is on the king side. It becomes on the king side because we can't attack each other's kings on the queen side. And on the king side, I dominate. So let's say I go bishop e2, supporting this g4 push, castles, and now I go with g4. And I have the space on the king side. I have the pawn storm on the king side. I have really everything going for me. My opponent goes with king b8, intends maybe like using this little minor advantage that black has to go on the semi-open c file, which I don't have, right? I have a pawn on c2, and really the trade-off is this pawn against this pawn. But one could argue that the d6 pawn is quite weak here. So I go with rook g1, which is a bit too slow. I should have gone with bishop e3 directly, just thrusting g5. And I want to mention that there are tactics here that just don't work for black. Takes, and you think that e5 wins a pawn here, but I can go queen b4, which I liked during the game. And if you take with the bishop, if you take with the knight, you lose a piece. And if you take with the bishop, I can just take here and then go knight d5. And look how this knight is an absolute monster. And, oh wait, it just hangs a piece too. Wait, what? Oh yeah, I can take here, it hangs a piece. And if you take now, I go knight d5 as well. Yeah! So the patient king b8 really just lets me play rook g1 and then rook c8 again, another patient move. I go bishop e3, and my idea is to space grab. I took a lot of time on this bishop e3, took 10 minutes on it, because I was extremely scared of knight e5, which is apparently like not good at all. g5 I was planning, the knight has to go back, which is super nice. It's the idea behind bishop e3, to kick the knight and make it useless, even make it like counterproductive for black, untying those rooks. And then I would go f4, but I was really scared of knight c4. And I have to give the bishop pair here, which is not ideal, and now knight b3, and it's hard to evaluate this position. The engine obviously likes it because of the abundance of space we have here on the king side, but as a human, the bishop pair is the bishop pair. My opponent thankfully did not go for this knight e5 thing, and after rook h e8, yes, after g5, the rooks are not uncoordinated, but the black pieces just look very stuffed, like a turkey on Thanksgiving. You look at this and you think that's going to be a dry meal. So now I go with f4, and on the contrast, my position is so nice with these pawns rifling through the center. My bishop pair super nicely adjacent to each other, and just like looking out for my position. My double knights here are nice. I will say though, my knight on c3 is being played against completely, and this is typical for these rouser lines in the Sicilian, or many Sicilians in general, to just completely play against the c3 knight, relevant to the Italian, in which a side pushes c3 or c6 to play against a c3 knight, so the knight doesn't have any squares. This is kind of like the same pattern. You'll see that this knight will struggle the entire game to make some play for me. My opponent trades on d4. Apparently I should have gone with this. I considered it for a long time, but after queen c5, I didn't see a real object here. I should go with queen d3, which I looked at, but after queen a5, it looks like black are doing fine. The engine loves this. For example, says f5 here, and says that, you know, white is doing very nicely. It's a bit more of a forcing line, but I liked bishop takes d4, which is less forcing, but looks at g7, you know, forces the knight to stay on g7, and then I go with f5. And this is where, from this moment in the game, the Python strategy, incorporated by Tigran Petrosyan, our 9th world chess champion himself, would really just let the opponent just like mellow in their own bad position and slowly massage the opponent out of a zugzwang, in which the opponent would have no good moves and thus would be the end of the game. So from here on out, my strategy is just to slowly improve my position and slowly disimprove my opponent's position, let alone just I'm trying to play against this knight, play against this bishop, play against this bishop, while my pieces just progressively get better. And this is how I do it. b5 is played. My opponent wants to take space on the king side, is fed up with all this, and also I'm with bishop takes d4, I have the sneaky threat queen e3. So on b5, a3 threat, blocking this b4 threat, queen b7, and now I go queen e3, axing my bishop and queen against this poor rook on d8. Yes, there's always this knight c7 block, but the knight is just like horrible and furthering like the passivity of this black side. So I was really hoping or knowing that my opponent was going to go with bishop c6, but he didn't. Instead, my opponent went with bishop f8. Extremely passive, and you always like to see this, so I just improve my position, h5, bishop c6, and I improve my position more, g6. I'm trying to break the pawn structure here. It wasn't the absolute best push, f5 was, and after e5, bishop here, knight here, the engine loves g6 now. Takes, and basically arguing that this, takes, f takes, very interesting. F takes, and then rook takes. Wow. Yeah, I did not consider this. I just wanted to break the structure here. After pawn takes, I am threatening to take this pawn and queen. So it's like I'm threatening a queen in 2, not checkmate, but queen in 2. H takes, and now f6 is played. And this is a criminal weakness. This is a criminal weakness. This is a criminal weakness. These pieces almost cannot move at all, and this is 6 points of material. So if 6 points of material is not only not moving, but blocking your position, that's like -9. And the white pieces can have up to like +10 evaluation from the engines. So like a queen up from such poor poor pieces, yeah. So I go bishop g4. I'm pointing at the weakness that's pinned, and after like a defense here, you're deactivating your attacking bishop, which is always nice. And now I play bishop b6. I want to wound this position more. The knight is pinned, the rooks are useless, the bishop is useless, and the bishop is tied down to e6. My plans are coming to fruition. I have all the time. I have almost all the time in the world here. I go with bishop a5. which is too slow. This gives d5, says the engine. Basically, I wanted to avoid things where black goes rook e8 and then knight a8, but I guess I just have bishop a5 here. But most importantly, I'm detaching my queen from this bishop with bishop a5, and my queen can threaten to go to h3, which was a really nice powerhouse threat on a pawn that's just ever so weakened. So queen c6 is played. Oh, didn't I have... What happens on queen h3 now? Queen h3, bishop e8. Yeah, I could have just won a pawn here. Yeah, I was planning on going queen h3. Anyways, I guess I forgot about it. Bishop f3 directly attacks this queen and threatens maybe the thrust e5 with some sacrifices on d5. I thought it was very interesting. My opponent has to play e5 to block my pawn, which is what I want, because after f5 here, although my bishop is behind the pawn structure, this bishop is criminally played against and just like doesn't have life. This bishop is jailed for life. Life behind bars of its own pawn structure. This knight is pinned to this rook. You kind of have to go like a Sudoku and like you find one number placement in a thing and then you find another, like it kind of like unrails for black. But for this to happen, black needs an insane amount of time. So after queen b7, I go with rook h1 and I'm just attacking this weakness finally. I'm going on this h file, I'm bringing my pieces in, bishop c6 does less than anything, knight d5, we trade, and now I'm playing against fewer pieces, but still some pieces are weak in this position. Rook d7, rook h8, the bishop moves, and here I'm low on time, so we just like trade moves a little bit. I'm not playing for a draw by any means, but I'm trying to like mitigate the time on my clock, and I was struggling to convert here. Try to pause the video and find the plan. I had a lot of trouble trying to convert this position that's awesome for white. But finally I looked at rook h4, which seemed appealing. I didn't like to move my queen in any way, shape, or form because it lets like queen a7, and I didn't like counterplay. So rook h4 is honestly interesting. I want to go with c5 and create more weaknesses on the queen side, while on the king side, there are still some weaknesses that are blocked through. And the object is simple. After rook d7, I go c4. Knight a8, trying to secure the knight or, you know, let the rook happen. But after takes, here I go for a complete blunder of the position. I go with rook b4. Huge blunder. My bishop is trapped, which I knew at the time. But after queen a6, bishop p2, you cannot take my bishop because I have this. But now rook b7, which I missed, I am low on time to be fair. Here it's still better for white, it's still winning for white on a top engine, but I do give this bishop in a crucial position. So yeah, I got away with it. Rook c5 is what I expected would be played, and it was played. So now I go with rook h8, threatening this bishop. It forces a queen c8, and now the queen and bishop are tied down to queen side things. So that's the art of creating weaknesses, is that now you have 9 plus 3, 12 points of material tied down to 5 points of material. So now I go with rook g8, kind of a waiting move, but I had a direct win with rook b3 or queen b3 here. Just pressuring the pawn here, and I'm winning the pawn certainly. But after rook g8, knight c7, and now I go with queen d3, pressuring this pawn. I'm threatening to take the knight and win a pawn for free. King a7, and now I triple down on this pawn. I'm really going all in. Queen b8 to defend this once more, but black simply doesn't have the leverage. I go with rook b3, just a patient move. I was struggling here. I have 1 minute left on my clock, and yeah, it's like tough to find the direct win. The best move here was taking, and after takes, I have bishop takes c7, which wins on the spot, and if knight takes, I have bishop e2, just like pressuring this, and black simply can't defend anymore. If you go rook b7, I have the cute rook a8 that is just lights out. There's nothing black can do here. Knight c7 to cover a6, I just take with mate. So I missed this, but I had very low time. I went rook b3, and after knight a6, a blunder, I can just take this pawn. And after rook b7, which was worrying for a time, I cannot take this knight because of rook takes b3. For my under 1,000 elos, white to play and win, comment down below if you find the solution. I'll give you like 10 seconds to pause. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In this position, I saw the move. I have 1 minute on my clock. My opponent has 30 seconds on their clock, and I go with b6. b6 opens up the discovery of this queen on this knight, and my opponent has his king on a8, doesn't do the move fully and resigns, because on king a8 I have queen takes a6, and if you sack the rook, well, I just win more than the rook. Like the king has to move here, and then I take with check, and I'm winning the queen with it, and it's just completely over. So see how I have more space. That space allocates me to create weaknesses and close in the position on the black pieces, and then from there I create more weaknesses on different sides of the board so that my opponent's pieces are fixed on those different weaknesses, and then from there I pressure until my opponent's position collapsed. That is the Python strategy, a technique invented by Tigran Petrosyan. I hope I did a good job from this. I have another recap from my tournament in Amsterdam. I think it was round 4, in which I played this type of game too. If you're interested in that, I'll leave the link in the bio. But yeah, that is round 5. I now have 2 out of 5. It's still not an ideal tournament, but tomorrow I'm paired against a 12-year-old candidates master who has 2200 FIDE ELO. I'm scared, to say the least. See you tomorrow.